Welcome to Promo Insiders, the ASI Media podcast that covers the issues that matter most to the promotional products industry. I'm Teresa Hegel, Executive Editor of Special Projects and Sustainability, and today I'm speaking with Dr. Simon Croom, a global business expert and professor of supply chain management at the University of San Diego. Simon will be a speaker at this year's Power Summit, being held October 12th to 14th in Scottsdale, Arizona. Thanks so much for joining us today, Simon.
Oh, you're welcome. Thanks for inviting me.
Of course. I wanted to start out and just talk to you a little bit about your background and how it's kind of informed your current work, because I understand you didn't actually start out in academia as a professor, and your bio kind of says you're not your typical business academic. So I'd love to hear more about what does that mean?
Okay. Yes, I basically started out my working career at Jaguar Cars in the UK, working in supply chain, mainly procurement, but other areas. They actually put me through university, which wasn't an initial plan of mine, but I then took a supply chain degree, went and worked for a small engineering company for 2 years, and that was revelatory in so many ways. And then I set up my own retail businesses and ran those for about 12, 13 years till my early to mid 30s. And then I went back to university, did a master's degree or two, my doctorate, and became a professor in the UK, mainly a research professor. And then I moved to San Diego 20 years ago. So I've been at USD now for 20 years. So a mixture of backgrounds in the UK and the US, a mixture of practical experience as well as academic research, and a fair degree of consulting and advising work, which is what I do now, including advising on procurement for the University of San Diego. So we're transforming our own procurement. We're practicing what we teach.
Oh, that's awesome. So, I mean, how does that kind of mix of practical and like academic background, how does that prepare you to be kind of a consultant and an expert that people go to?
I guess for me, the key thing about being an academic with some practical experience is you're trying to do a number of things. You're trying to explain why things happen. So you're trying to understand the theory behind disruptions, for example, in supply chain. But at the same time, you're also trying to inform practice, try and help organizations to understand how they could make improvements or enhancements or think about strategic direction. So it's a two-way approach. It's not unique to academia, but I think for me, it's why I do what I do. I like to think that my teaching and my research has a practical function, that it helps to inform and explain practice, and I'm curious. So I recently took a master's degree in psychology because I've been researching psychopathic personality disorder in executives. Another story for another day, but you know, that's kind of what keeps the juice flowing, so to speak.
Yeah. I mean, I think curiosity, that's something I think as a journalist is so crucial, is like, if you don't care about how the world works, or if you're not curious, if you don't have questions, like, what are you doing? Like, you shouldn't even, you're not in the right field, basically.
Absolutely. And it's never boring. Supply chain is never boring. There's always one crisis or another coming along. But I think it's been a fascinating few decades in supply chain. Certainly since COVID, I think nearly everybody understands what a supply chain is and why there are challenges, should we say.
Yeah. Well, speaking of all of the upheavals and disruptions in supply chains, how can companies actually kind of build a resilient global supply chain to weather those different disruptions?
Oh, it's obviously very straightforward and easy because everybody can do it. What a great question. I think resilience is about flexibility. Flexibility is the ability to do different things and to change what we do. So that agility is really important. And that really is a challenge, because for many organizations, when we go down the lean route, or we're trying to maximize our profitability or control costs, we're trying to look for status. We're trying to sort of keep things the same, build, an operational or a warehouse or a supply side activity that we can then hope it just carries on. The key to resilience is just being aware that what you did yesterday may not work, probably won't work tomorrow. So what does that mean? How do you become flexible? That's a very specific operational strategy. That's a very big picture. It doesn't answer the question of what do I do tomorrow, but it's really about that underlying capability.
Yeah, some of it is kind of that mindset, and you have to have a company that is willing to be flexible and change. And I guess one thing I wonder, do you think that it's easier for smaller companies to have that flexibility? Like, are they more nimble, or can a large organization, shift their supply chain easily?
Well, by definition, if you're smaller, you've got more scope to change because you don't need to involve so many parts to the machine. I think of my own experience running my retail businesses. It was very easy for me to change because it was me. So I just would take the decision. Now, even with that, you can't take decisions in isolation. You might need the banks to fund it. You might need suppliers to change things that they do. You might need to invest. So you have to understand the consequences of your decisions. You have to be able to really understand what's going on in the marketplace. What is happening to the drivers of your cost? What is happening to the pattern of demand? Where are there opportunities in terms of downstream and upstream, in terms of what are customers doing in different geographic markets? What's happening in the supply side? So alongside all of this idea that maybe small businesses can be more agile, there's a lot of demand for understanding the domain in which you're operating, and that can be a big challenge for small businesses because you just don't have the bandwidth to understand your upstream and downstream supply chain as readily, say, as a larger company.
Okay. So one of the things that obviously is, I guess, like a really big disruptor right now with supply chains is, of course, tariffs. And it seems like there's not really a lot of solid ground that you can stand on with them because it's always like the news keeps changing. So I'm just wondering, like, what can global firms do to minimize the effects of tariffs, or just kind of shore themselves up so that it doesn't like totally have like an adverse impact on what they're doing?
Who knows? I mean, I didn't mean to be so glib about it, but because it changes every day, not just are there tariffs or are there no tariffs? What are the tariffs? What are the tariffs on? I mean, if you're an import-export broker, it's a nightmare scenario because you've got all this documentation to try and fulfill on the basis of really poor information and intelligence. I think the starting point is tariffs affect cost, obviously. So the question is, how significant are costs to you? And that sounds glib. I mean, cost is never unimportant, but it's not always the most important strategic objective. I'll give another example from my experience as well. In some of the products that I sold, quality and availability was far more important to my customers than the actual cost. One of the reasons for that would be that these customers were restaurants, and for them, pricing was a very flexible tool. So if the price of tomatoes increased by 100% one week, then they would change their menus, change their recipes, change their pricing. So they can adapt to that. They've got a lot of elasticity. So you have to understand where cost fits in with tariffs. But that's not the only effect of tariffs. What happens as a consequence of these price pressures, cost pressures, is that other organizations may stop purchasing from existing sources of supply. So that could mean that your supplier now has a surplus of inventory or has capacity that is not fulfilled by demand. So that may give you leverage. And that may give you leverage to approach that supply and say, look, yeah, we've got a 50% tariff. That's going to put our costs up. But, price isn't fixed. Cost is a consequence. You've been charging me $5 for this item. You clearly make profit on it, but that's really a reflection of your capacity utilization, your yield, your quality performance, how much you paid for labor, how much you paid for your supplies. So we know that price is essentially whatever people agree to pay. So understanding the drivers of total cost is really at the heart. It's always at the heart of supply chain, but it's at the heart of some of the strategies to deal with tariffs.
Okay. I wanted to shift gears a little bit. I don't know if you may have noticed at the top of the episode, I mentioned my title has the word sustainability in it. So I do like to kind of weave that in whenever I can. So I'm just wondering how sustainability fits into supply chains, and like how companies should be, could be, need to be kind of building transparency into their systems.
Yeah, I think it's absolutely critical. We teach sustainable supply chain and have done for 18 years at USD. We do a lot of practical work. Students at graduate and undergraduate level do projects for companies, all sorts of sustainability issues. But what I always say to the students is, if you think about where sustainability issues are executed, it's in supply chain. It's, can we buy renewable materials? Can we buy sustainable materials? What form of energy are we buying? How do we manage our operations processes? Can we reduce waste? Can we minimize environmental impact? That's where supply chain, in supply chain, the rubber hits the road. So sustainability is absolutely critical. It can be one of those topics that organizations see as well. It's a bit further down the road, but as we look at the consequences of climate change, we're going to see a lot more pressure to be sustainable, whether it's in the US, whether it's in Europe, whether it's in Asia. It's going to affect us. I think there are also going to be significant issues in terms of sustainability, because it has a clear impact on the upstream. You know, where do we get our sources of supply from? You know, if you're in the food sector, you're seeing that your supply chain is changing drastically. You can no longer buy certain products from equatorial regions. You can no longer need to go so far for soft fruit, for example. So let me give the example. I'm English, as you may have guessed.
I didn't catch that.
So in the UK, we import a lot of soft fruit, except in the summer, because the weather's not adequate for all year round growing. But the growing season has come sooner and it's longer in the UK, which means you can buy more local produce. There's a wine sector that's rapidly growing in areas that were too far north in the past. So, you know, on those sorts of produce. We're also finding that with the movement of populations, because it's too hot to live in equatorial regions, it's too hot to live in southern regions. The energy implications of operating in warmer environments are all having an impact on our supply chain. So whether we do it ourselves or whether we're affected by it, it is inexorably affecting supply chain.
Yeah, yeah. And one thing that I think is interesting, I've noticed a lot of people in the promo industry, especially suppliers, their supply chain, you know, VPs and experts, a lot of them have gotten sustainability in their title, because I think it does just kind of go hand in hand. So I think, you know, it does make sense to tie the two together and think of them as like one kind of area to focus on.
Sure. I mean, when I think about our procurement of promotional products, we're increasingly looking at how sustainable and recyclable are those products. Do we actually need these products? You know, we've found one of the growth areas has been drinking bottles and aluminum drinking bottles and more sustainable forms of plastic. Also, in the giveaways that we have for students, alumni, other members of our community, we're thinking about what message is that sending to the recipient. If we're giving away, you know, paper-based products by the thousands versus, you know, more reusable products. So I can imagine, and I'm excited to learn a lot more. Actually, I'm talking to a few people in the next few days, and obviously at Scottsdale, we'll learn a lot more about that aspect of transition in your sector.
Yeah, absolutely. So to speak about Scottsdale, the Power Summit coming up in October, what is one key point you hope the people who attend will take away from your talk?
Or am I allowed to give free samples away
Just
before the
let's
event?
give them a little teaser, a little taste, get people excited about it.
Um, well, what I'm hoping to do in the time I've got is, one, address what are the sorts of trends and how do we think about those trends globally. Not just the tariffs, but this issue of regionalization. Supply chains are undoubtedly global, but it's a lot more strategic. So those are the issues I want to talk about. Obviously, allude to geopolitical shifts, but I think digital transformation is the biggest factor that is going to affect supply chains in the future, and it's something that we hear a lot about AI, but we don't hear enough about Industry 4.0, which is every aspect of additive manufacturing or 3D manufacturing, the Internet of Things, robotics, hyperconnectivity, and so forth. So the ability to see all the way through your supply chain, that transparency that you mentioned earlier, Teresa, I think that's something that is viable where it wasn't viable before. That has an implication for a lot of things. In some aspects, it has an implication for the illegal, illicit, and abusive supply chains that exist. There's a lot of illegal activity alongside our legitimate supply chains, and I think that transparency is going to be absolutely paramount. Mm-hmm. It's easy to talk about the future because nobody comes back and holds you to account, but certainly within the next 5 years, we're going to see a massive shift in how supply chains are planned and controlled, and how transparent they are. Will that be better? Not necessarily, because humans are not renowned for taking great decisions when they've got more information. Right. So we'll see how that goes.
Yeah. It's funny you say that, it's easy to look in the future because nobody comes back and calls you out for it, because our magazine Counselor just a couple of years ago had its 70th anniversary. And I did a whole story where I looked at predictions we had made as the magazine over the decades, and then I was like, oh, was this one right, was this one wrong, was this one right? So sometimes we do go back and check our work and find out that, oh, we made a lot of very silly predictions, but we were spot on about some things. So
I agree. When you look back, it's very fascinating. So the biggest example of this is in the 1990s, most of the business literature was about how Japan will dominate global economies. There was hardly any discussion of China. So, your ability to diagnose and then forecast is always constrained by the lack of, obviously, foresight.
Right. I mean, people always for instance, the pandemic. I mean, I guess people had been predicting that there could be global pandemics, but was anyone ever really going to predict that it would happen the way it did and have the effect that it did?
And the answer is yes.
What's
that?
The
answer is yes.
Oh,
the answer is yes. We knew exactly what would happen in the event of a pandemic.
Then why were people not prepared for it?
All sorts of biases, one of which is, well, what's the probability that will happen and affect me in the next 5 years? That was extremely low until it wasn't. And I think that's the problem with risk and resilience strategy. That's a whole other game in supply chain, is how do you manage risk? Because we face it daily. There's a fire in a factory 4 tiers up your supply chain that means that you're going to have no supply. When we saw that with fires in Japan, basically closing down the whole global automobile industry about 15 years ago. How can you foresee that when you haven't got transparency? And that's why I think the transparency of supply chains is going to be the biggest transformation in the next 5 to 10 years.
Okay. Well, Simon, I think this has been a really great discussion. Is there anything else you wanted to add to kind of wrap it up or get people hyped for October?
Supply chain's the story of everything. It's absolutely critical, and supply chains run the world. And if we stop thinking about economies on national boundaries and start to think about economies around supply chains, it completely transforms the way we see the economic system. So that's a big claim, but what I hope to address in October is a little bit of what that might mean.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Well, thank you so much for joining us, Simon, and for everybody. This is Promo Insiders, and I'm Teresa Hegel.